Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you listening to this, our 11th Hit It and Quit It this year, Focus Consulting Group. This particular one, we wanted to hear from you. So we asked the question, what have you been thinking about? What's on your mind? What are some questions that you have or things that you've been experiencing over the course of the year that you'd like? I don't know if we have the answers, but we certainly will give you some thoughts, and then you can decide whether or not we have the answers. So I'm Keith Robinson, and of course, I'm joined by my colleagues, Jim Ware, Liz Severns, and Brian Kozlowski. And we're going to take the questions, we sort of boil them down into four categories, if you will. And we're going to take the questions for each of us. So without further ado, let's just dive right into, well, what is on your mind? No surprise, by the way, that these three questions popped up, which is relates to flexible work, it relates to hybrid, the performance as it relates to hybrid, et cetera, et cetera. So you can read the questions, but I have three words to address three questions: autonomy, autonomy, and autonomy. Same word, three different ways to use it. And of course, many of us know of the work of Dan Pink in the book Drive, where he talked about autonomy as a key motivator for knowledge workers. And we know from our own experience through the pandemic that we all left on a Friday and we didn't come back on a Monday, and things continued to go, even though many CEOs I talked to thought for sure things would grind to a halt. As a matter of fact, Gallup did some measuring and found that productivity was up during the pandemic when we were all far afield doing our things from home. That didn't start out that way, but it eventually got that way. Why? Because people were thrown into the deep end of the autonomy pool. Therefore, we had no choice but to increase our performance and continue to be productive. Now, we had to learn how to be productive. Things like Zoom and all that other technology helped us be productive. We also had to learn how to address point number two, fatigue, because separating from work was much, much harder when your office was your dining room. And as we wander by and we check our emails, we got fatigued. This hasn't changed, by the way. And our observation and the research would tell you that people have gotten into some pretty bad habits when it comes to being autonomous, working from home, and fatigue. Fatigue takes over when we start to break on a constant basis our patterns of behavior, our normal patterns of behavior. So recognize that when you're hearing about fatigue, it's likely we haven't really gotten into a groove. Do I work from home? Do I work from the office? And how does that all work? So fatigue is real. Fatigue is there. Anxiety is real, by the way. And anxiety is there simply because we've gotten out of old patterns of behavior and we're still working at forming new patterns. Now, regarding question three, it doesn't really help that organizations have gotten a little bit schizophrenic on, well, you got to come to work. No, you don't have to come to work. You got to work 6 days a week. No, you only have to work 5 days a week. You get the idea. Recently Goldman Sachs made the announcement that, yeah, we have expectations that everybody will be in the office 6 days a week, right? Of course, obviously that was a fallacy, but the reality is some firms are back 5 days a week, while other firms basically have said, we're not going back. And then, of course, there's something in between called the 3-2 or the 2-3. The reality is nobody has really figured this out yet completely. But think about autonomy. If you create an autonomous work environment, it doesn't really matter where you are. Your culture drives, the team drives, and the process drives where you need to be and when you need to be there. So are in-person firms outperforming firms that embrace work from home or work from Starbucks or work from wherever? Well, let's talk about investment performance. There is no evidence to suggest that investment performance has gotten better or worse as a consequence of being in the office or out of the office. But here's what we have learned. What we have learned is that those who are autonomous actually produce at a higher result with better output. And again, autonomy is one of the key motivators of a knowledge workforce. So we're all knowledge workers in this industry. So if you think about your culture and you think about autonomy and you think about embedding autonomy in your culture, that will drive all the other answers to these questions. Will people be less fatigued? Yes. Why? Because they'll create new habits that are required by the team that allow them to work autonomously and do the work the way they want to do the work. Will it be a hybrid? I don't know. Autonomy would suggest if I want to be in the office, matter of fact, I was on with a client this morning, and her comment was she was working from home. She said, I'd rather be in the office. Well, okay, autonomy would suggest that then go to the office if you feel you have a better work-life experience that way. So hybrid basically becomes irrelevant when autonomy actually becomes the foundation on which you work. And then, of course, performance. There's so many things, as you all know, that go into performance: the markets, interest rates, you get the general idea, macroeconomic factors. It's usually not about where I sit. It's about how I respond and what I anticipate. And if I'm working in an autonomous environment, I can respond and anticipate much easier than if I'm forced into one box or the other. So if you want to answer all these three questions, think of three words: autonomy, autonomy, and autonomy. Bake it into your culture, bake it into your leadership and management mindset. And what you'll find is productivity will be up. Hopefully performance will be up. Fatigue will be down, and you won't even have to address question number 3. Let me toss it over to Brian, who's going to talk a little bit about investment funds and strategies.
Thanks, Keith. It's been interesting this year as we've embarked on our, these questions are very much appreciated. And as we were looking at them over the last week, it was as we were thinking back to our own conference a few weeks ago, these are very conventional questions. Where's the market going from a strategic perspective? Obviously, the passive active conversation question too. And we get these a fair amount. And our approach to them is the same. So take out concentrated global value in one and add in any other strategy. And the unconventional way to ask these questions is, what's your strategic plan? So that's where we typically start, is when clients come forward and ask, kind of how's that balance happening in question 2, or what strategies are going to be in vogue in question 1? We're not Karnak, but it comes back to, who are you as a firm? What's your strategic plan? What are your strengths? How are you leveraging those? And what are the opportunities? And where are the opportunities to carry you forward? And it's amazing. When we ask those questions, we get some looks like, I hadn't really thought about that. Because what you want to do as an organization is, when you think of your stakeholders, starting with your clients, because that's a lot of what these 2 questions are aimed at, what are your clients expecting from you? What capabilities do you have? Do you have capabilities in global investing, specifically in value? If so, that's great. And how do you leverage those? But if you don't, are the puzzle pieces going to fit together? So this all starts with the SWOT, the old business school test of, who are we as an organization? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are those opportunities that we can capitalize on? And the threats. And the threats are always interesting, because there's not much you can do about them aside from really appreciating that they're there. And that starts to help answer these questions. Now, I'm a firm believer there's still an active role for active management. But as our dear colleague Michael Falk used to say, there is no place for index hugging anymore. So the world has changed. The world has changed in a way that you really have to emphasize what your strengths are. You have to think about your clients. How do you fit within their portfolio? And why do they hire you more so than another firm? What is the answer to that? It goes back to your strategy. It goes back to who you are as an organization. What's our brand in the marketplace? How are we differentiating what we do each and every day versus those that are trying to win business from us? And an interesting part from there is, how are we going to organize our way to do it? So without starting with clients and understanding their needs, it's hard to answer that question. So we've heard a lot this year about private credit. It's definitely an area, a very hot area, and one we've seen both in Ignites and Fundfire the firms want to get into. But when you think about private credit, the firms that are in it have been in it for a long period of time. Some of the firms we're working with have been in over a decade. They saw where the puck was going before the puck actually got there. So they were able to establish their brand. They were able to develop a strategy to leverage their strengths, to think about where they're going. So when you think about answers to question one, the real question you should be asking yourselves is, what do we do well? What do our clients need? And how are we going to be able to provide it for them? So thinking in question two, what we have seen, it's less maybe the passive active, it's more the strategy and the wrapper. So we've had conversations with a lot of clients who have moved their funds to ETFs, have the strategy be more liquid, be more interesting to their clients. And that's part of the direction they're going. But again, how does that play into your strategy? What capabilities do you have as an organization that you can leverage? From an ownership perspective, what does that mean for our bottom line? As you think about all of this in totality, when you think of your team, what employees, what team members do we have to be able to execute on the strategies and to be able to drive that value, not only for your clients, but also for your firm in total? So I challenge all of you, as you're thinking through questions very similar to these two, what will work in the next cycle is, what do we have? How are we positioned to work in the next cycle? How are we going to communicate our strengths in the marketplace for the next cycle? What team members do we have to help us execute? What team members do we need to help us get there? And we think of this balance, passive and active, because it is, quite frankly, the number one threat that we get when we do our strategic work, is how are we going to tell our story? What is differentiated about our investment capabilities to be able to combat some of that? Why would a client want to put our strategy in their portfolio? So again, from a strategic perspective, so I will latch on to Keith and thinking through the one word answer. Think through your client's needs, your employees' needs, and your owner's needs. And that's the way to think about answering these two questions. I'll then now turn it over to Liz to talk about questions we got on DE and I.
Thanks, Brian. And no surprise, just like Keith wasn't surprised to see remote and hybrid work environment, a question about that. We are not surprised to see a question about DE&I, because it continues to be a hot topic and continues to be a topic going into 2024 that people really need to think about. We've been measuring diversity and inclusion for several years now, and our surveys show that the area of focus really needs to be on inclusion. It scores lower than diversity on almost every survey. And what we're seeing is that firms are responding to this by putting more focus on inclusion. Because we know, and they know, that if you focus on inclusion, you're going to get more diversity and more equity in your firms. So if people feel safe, if they feel secure, if they feel seen and heard, if they feel like they can be themselves, you will have more diversity and more equity. So what we're seeing is that firms are now embedding programs into their normal development that they're doing and putting a DEI slant on those normal development programs. So they're using programs like improving and applying emotional intelligence, tools like the Enneagram, to really help people to reduce their unconscious bias, to become more aware of, understanding of, and really appreciative of how people think, feel, and behave differently based on who they are, where they come from, and what they experience. So they're using programs that improve psychological safety. We know that that is a key to high-performing organizations. So they're using psychological safety and improving that to be able to focus on aligning values, right? Building and strengthening trust in the organization and creating a curious and growth mindset, which will all lead to feelings of inclusion and then more diversity and equity. So they're focusing on strengthening, building cultures at their organizations that create rules of the road, right? Clear values, behaviors, expectations that make DE&I just who they are. It's kind of who they are on a day-to-day basis. And it's not some special initiative. So it doesn't matter how well you think you're doing diversity if people don't feel like they're seen, if they don't feel understood, if they don't feel seen, and they don't feel safe. So solve for inclusion, which these firms are doing in 2024, and you'll solve for diversity and equity. So Jim, you want to take us home with artificial intelligence?
Yes, be happy to. So hopefully you're enjoying these comments and finding them useful from questions we got from clients and our view of them. A final question that we got was related to AI and then geopolitical strains. Well, I think that was an IQ test for FCG to see if we were dumb enough to offer up opinions about what's going to happen in the world. And hopefully we didn't bite on that one. I realize there are experts out there who are paid to make those kind of predictions. We are not, but we do have some thoughts about AI because we ask our clients on an ongoing basis what they're doing with AI. Some of them will just offer up candidly that they think it's going to be interesting, but they don't have anything yet. And others have gotten into a little bit of how they're using it. And some of that is what you would expect, like things like data analysis and processing and some predictive analysis. We thought it'd be interesting to ask AI what AI can do. So we just went to our friend Chat GPT and asked it the question, how can artificial intelligence help professional investors? And it came up with data analysis and processing, predictive analysis, which you would expect, sentiment analysis, okay, on news articles, social media, etc., algorithmic trading, risk management, portfolio optimization, fraud detection, which interestingly, we had a team member who developed a really good AI tool in that way, so that we can give you more on that if you wish. But fraud detection, alternative data sources, personalized investment strategies, real-time market monitoring, natural language processing, backtesting, and simulation. So those are what comes out of AI itself. Presumably AI knows what it is doing about these things, because after all, it's the source. And then I thought, well, why not ask it who's actually using AI? And there it came up with some specific firms. And by the way, if you're interested in this, if you don't have AI and you want me to print this and send it to you, just let Liz or Laura know, and we'll be happy to do that. But robo advisors, a firm, Wealthfront Betterment, algorithmic trading platforms, Quant Connect, market research and prediction, a firm called Alpha Sense, portfolio optimization. They mentioned BlackRock's Aladdin, alternative data analysis, Quandai, etc. So yes, I mean, firms are out there using it. If we had any great secrets, it would probably be because a firm confided in us what their secret was, and therefore we couldn't tell you. So that's what we know about AI. Personally, I think it's fascinating, and I think it's fun to. I have an account with AI. I didn't realize I had it until I double checked today. $20 for a monthly subscription, and there are questions I've thrown in there in the past that are interesting to me, and usually AI comes back with something pretty darn intelligent. And the good news is pretty darn intelligent and instantaneously. That's what's so fascinating. When I dropped in these two questions today, the answers came back instantaneously. Boom, here's what AI is thinking about in the investment world. Anyway, so that's a little bit about AI. I hope this session today was useful for you. If you have additional questions and thoughts, please always be willing to reach out to us, because that's what we're here for. And we would love to answer your questions and have a dialogue with you. The next Hit It and Quit It will be December 15th. And as you might expect, it's gearing up for 2024. So there'll be a lot of interesting thoughts that we'll share with you on that Friday, resuming our normal scheduling on Fridays. Wishing you a good week to come, hoping you had a great Thanksgiving, and do stay in touch with us. That's all for now.